Thank you. How many of you have found that in some point in your life, everything you seem to do just seems meaningless? You ever had that happen? Let's see a show of hands sometime in your life. How many of you feel that way right now? Put those hands down. I noticed that when I approached about my 40s, I started asking myself the big questions in life. Questions like, where did I come from? How did I get here? Where did I park my car? The big questions. And the biggest question of all is, where am I going? And sometimes I feel like, even though a certain part of my life is right on target, it's the path I want to take, there are other parts of my life that are so far off the path that it's not even on the map anymore. And I hate that feeling. But I know and I believe with all my heart that the answer to where I need to go, the life I need to live, the life you need to live, if we are off that path, is right here in our head. I think that when we were younger, we left clues. I think the people that loved us and knew us, they left clues for us as well. Now, I saw this, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago. I was thinking about this whole thing. How do I get back on this path? What's the catalyst I need to get back to where I need to go? And my son, Josh, who you all have met here working in the back, is a senior at St. Anthony's High School. And as a part of his senior project, he's teaching the 4th graders math. So he said, Dad, the teacher said we need to learn fractions, so do what you can. Anything you want, help these kids with fractions. So Josh looked around the room, as you know, here on Maui. It's a very diverse group. He saw all this diversity. He saw that all of these children were very proud of their nationality. So he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of your grandparents. And then I want you to tell me what fraction you are, which represents all of them. So the first little girl said, okay, I'm quarter Japanese, I'm quarter Filipino, I'm quarter Haole, and I'm quarter Chinese. And she said, that's great, that's wonderful. Well, the next fellow went and he said, I'm half Tongan, I'm half Samoan, I'm half Fijian, and I'm half Hawaiian. And the rest of the kids said, wait, you can't be that. That makes 2. He says, oh, yes, I can. And they, well, how can you do that? I'm twice as big as the rest of y'all. But he made me think. That truly was the catalyst I needed to think about, who am I? Where are these road markers that I left along the way? And I started thinking about my own heritage, my own grandparents. And I thought to myself, I wonder if my grandparents have left me clues. And I remember this old parable. I don't know where it came from. It was about grandparents, and it goes like this. You can see the true reflection of yourself in the eyes of those who love you, exactly the way you are right now. And I thought about that. And I thought, my parents love me. But my parents loved me in a different way. My parents wanted me to get good grades in school. They wanted me to graduate. They wanted me to be somebody. My grandparents could care less. They just loved me the way I was. They loved me completely unconditionally. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, I came back. My grandma and my dad were sitting in the kitchen. My dad opened up my report card, and the expression on his face just went wild. A D in Spanish? What's the deal with this? No TV, no bicycles. We're extending your study period from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock. That's it. My grandma, who saw the same D, looked at me and she said, would you like a piece of cake, honey? And I thought, this is so unfair, Dad. When you brought home bad grades, Grandma's asking if you want a piece of cake, and you're getting all over me for this. Well, I found out later that only grandmas offer a piece of cake when you bring home a bad grade, or a good grade, or any grade for that matter, right? And I thought about my grandparents. I wonder if my grandparents could teach me a lesson about who I was. So I called a grandma that I knew, my mom. And I said, Mom, tell me, what's amazing about being a grandma? And she said, first of all, the amazing thing about being a grandma is that my grandchildren are much better looking than my children are. She said, my grandchildren are smarter than my children. But the most amazing thing of all is I have no idea how my children, those kids who were fixing to have an accident, back-talking, horrible children, how they could raise such great kids. I don't know how that's possible. That's what amazed her the most. Well, that night I went to bed, and I was thinking about my grandparents as I went to sleep. And as I was fading from this conscious state to this semi-conscious state, my Grandpa Summers appeared to me. Now, my Grandpa Summers died when I was 13 years old, but I remember him vividly. I remember the smell of his cigar, the smile he would give underneath that mustache he had. My grandpa was an artist, he was a carpenter, and he was a philosopher. My grandpa was a gadget guy. He'd love to take things apart and find out how things worked. My grandpa used to walk around the house and ask questions out loud. I always thought that was kind of weird, but he did it nonetheless, and he'd come up with the answers. And in my dream, my grandpa reminded me when we were together, when I was little, together we would take things off the shelf and we'd take them apart. And we'd try to put them back together again the way they were, which almost never happened. But it didn't matter. We'd take that toaster and we'd put it back on the shelf, and he would just call it art. That's all it was. It worked out fine. And my grandpa, as he faded away from my side, I looked deep into his eyes to see if I could, in fact, see my reflection. And what I saw was the Bob Summers that used to be. I remember being like that. As my grandpa faded away, this is what he said to me. He said, "Never lose your sense of wonder." And I realized as I had grown older, I'd lost my sense of wonder. The magic was gone. And that was the message my grandpa was giving to me. Don't lose it. Get it back. So that morning I woke up in bed, and before I opened my eyes, I wondered about this and I wondered about that. I wondered what would happen if there was nothing else to wonder about. Don't wonder about that. That's not a good thing. And all of a sudden, everything looked different to me. Well, I went back to the library. I had a book to return. And by the way, how many of you find when you go to the library, you go to one section, or maybe you're not this person. You go to one section, you read one thing of books, and that's it. Well, I used to read only books on sales, customer service, and management. That was it. The Kihei Library, there's 3 books on sales, customer service. That's it. And they're all drawn in already. Well, as I was returning the sales book that I had overdue for years, I decided I'm just going to walk up and down the aisles and see what's there. And this most amazing thing happened to me. All of a sudden, every book became interesting to me. Every book. I picked up books on World War I. I picked up books on the criminal mind, which actually seemed kind of, just one of those things I was in tune with. I picked up a book on, I shouldn't say that. I picked up a book called Calculus for Dummies. And quite frankly, who isn't a dummy when it comes to calculus? I had the most eclectic collection of books when I walked out of that library. I was so excited with all these new things I had, I sat up all night reading this, reading that, reading that. Midnight, I decided to open this calculus book and try to do calculus problems. And somewhere about 1 in the morning, I faded away during the midst of some differential equation I was working on, and my grandpa Hanaclaw appeared to me, my mom's dad. Now, it only makes sense that my mom's dad would appear at this time because he was a mathematical genius. He used to test my brother and I. He'd say, "All right, here's what I want you to do. Bob, you list out as fast as you can 4 4-digit numbers, and Dan, you add them on the calculator, and we'll see who can come up with the answer first, me or that calculator." My grandpa always won. And what was so amazing, we'd be in the grocery store with him. He would add up every single one of those groceries along with tax, and he would write the check for exactly the amount before the cashier ever told him what it was. And it blew people away. And if there was ever a discrepancy, he was always right. He was always right. I remember when I was little with my grandpa, along with all the great things he used to do with me, when I was maybe a junior or senior in high school, he would sit down with me and he'd say, "What do you want to be when you get out of high school? What do you want to do? What do you want to have?" And we would just have these conversations. I would talk and he would listen. He always had this notepad with him and a pencil. He carried it everywhere he went. And as he would be listening to what I was saying, he'd be writing all these things down, asking more questions. "What do you want to do? What do you want to have? What do you want to be?" Write them down. And then my mom would say, "Come on, honey, it's time to go." And my grandpa would go, "Take this with you, and I want you to look at it frequently." What I would give to have that piece of paper today. I never looked at it. I just didn't do it. And as I was fading away, I looked into my grandpa's eyes, as he was anyway leaving my dream. And the reflection I saw is what I could be in the future. I saw all the things I could be if I followed these guidelines and guideposts that he gave me. And as I left, my grandpa said this to me: "You can be anybody you want to be. You just have to plan for it and go after it." That's it. And I'd forgotten all that. So I woke up that morning and I started thinking to myself, wow. Took out a pencil and paper, started writing all these ideas down. The ideas turned into goals. 10 turned into 20 and turned into 100. And as I was reading these 100 different things I'd listed, I'd come to realize that so many of them looked familiar to me when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, but I did nothing with those things. I was more excited on this night than I was the night before. I was going to do everything. I was going to be a millionaire. I was going to ride on the back of garbage trucks. I was going to do the coolest things you ever did. And right about the time, maybe 1:30 or 2 in the morning, I was going to be a world-renowned chef. I started to fall asleep. My grandma died, it appeared to me. My mom's mom. She's Italian. She is the most stereotypical Italian grandma you've ever met in your life. How many people do you know that approach you with their fingers out to squeeze your cheeks and give you a big old kiss? That was my grandma. Now, my grandma had an interesting background. family tradition tells us that her father was accused of killing his brother in Naples, Italy. And he escaped as a stowaway on a boat to the United States, to Galveston, Texas, where he eventually came to St. Louis, Missouri. Now, mafia connections, my grandma never really said, so we never really knew. So as I grew up with my grandma, this very expressive Italian woman, I see her speaking with a ladle in her hand. That's the only way I can picture her talking. Spaghetti sauce flying everywhere, laughing, singing, dancing. And as my grandma looked at me in my dream, she said, "Honey, do you remember when we were little? We would sing and we would laugh and we'd do dishes together." Susan, we haven't done dishes together in a while, have we? Maybe I shouldn't have brought that one up. Not that dishes was the big deal here. We'd sing and we'd laugh and we'd dance together and we would have fun together. And we would sit at the kitchen table and talk about all the fun and unique things we used to do. And as I looked in my grandma's eyes, I didn't see a reflection I recognized. I saw this light in her eyes. It was glimmering and it was dancing and it was fun. And as she left, she said to me in my dream, "Your life was meant to live joyfully, every minute of your life." I faded away. And that morning I got up and I swore to myself, on this day, nothing is going to be routine today. So instead of getting up at 7 o'clock, I slept till noon on that particular day. And I did everything different that day. I went places I hadn't gone before. I met people I hadn't seen before. I had done things I hadn't done before. Now, I'm one of those guys that 3 times a week regularly goes up to the Kihei swimming pool and swims 1 mile, 72 laps, back and forth, back and forth. On this day, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. So I just hung out with the 10-year-olds and jumped off the diving board. By the way, when you're 44 years old, do not attempt to do a flip with 10-year-olds off the diving board. It does not pay off. I had so much fun, the lifeguard made me sit out with all my new friends for 10 minutes and time out. At the end of that day, I was so exhausted, I was sleeping 8 o'clock at night. And as I was reminiscing about all my new friends that I made that day, all the new people I met, I'm not just talking about my 10-year-old friends here, them too. All of a sudden, my grandma Summers, my grandma Gamache, came to me in a dream. Now, my grandma Gamache is one of those people that is so special to me because when you're with my grandma, it's as if you're the only person in the room. When I talk to my grandma, she just complete eye contact. Now, I don't know what I believe about reincarnation, but I want to tell you this. If there is such a thing, I lived some time with my grandma, maybe 2,000, 3,000 different lives, because there was something special about that woman. Now, what I remember most about my grandma Gamache is she didn't die until she was 93 years old. And my grandma knew when she was going to die. And the day before she died, she had all of her children, all of her grandchildren around her bed with her. And when I walked in the room, my grandma held my hand and looked at me. And no matter who else was in that room, it didn't make any difference. My grandma wouldn't take her attention off of me. And I actually felt kind of bad for my uncles and my other cousins because she wouldn't pay attention to them. And nonetheless, as my grandma was fading away, it was almost like being on The Wizard of Oz. Y'all remember The Wizard of Oz? When Dorothy was leaving Oz and she was saying goodbye to all her friends. She said, you know, "Goodbye, Tin Man. Goodbye, Lion." And she looked up and she said, "And Scarecrow, I'm going to miss you most of all." And that's how my grandma, felt, I think, when we were together. And as she faded away and I looked in her eyes, I saw something very special. It wasn't me in the past. It wasn't me in the future. It wasn't a dancing fun light. What I saw in my grandma's eyes, I felt like was my own soul. I had never seen anything like that before. And as I faded away, or my grandma did anyway, the message she left me, the most important message of all was, when all is said and done, the only thing that matters in this life are the lessons you've learned and the relationships you've developed. So I got up that morning early, 4 o'clock, woke up my wife. She hates that when I wake her up at 4 in the morning. Kissed her and told her I loved her. Went into the kids' room, told them I loved them. Called all my friends in grade school, high school, and college. I had the best time developing all these new relationships. And reflecting back on my experience with my grandparents, I realized they had provided me with all the markers I needed to get back on my path, to find my way once again. And what I see now, somewhere down in the future, I'm going to be marching down my path of life, happy and wonderful. And all 4 of my grandparents are going to appear to me on this path. And my grandma died, and my Italian grandma is going to step forward. And she's going to say, "Bob, the rest of your grandparents and I have been thinking, we don't want to worry you, but we've noticed our great-grandchildren are better looking than our grandchildren." Grandma. With that, thank you very much.